All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for coming to this very important event. Welcome everybody to the MUNSU Breezeway. I want to thank all of the students that have come out today to exercise their democratic rights and to ask our leaders and university administration what is going on with our only public university. So thank you very much for coming. I also want to thank community members, union partners, student groups, thank you, Joel, and of course to our distinguished guests from right to left, we have leader of the NDP, Dinn, PC, MHA, and a lot of critic areas, so I'm not going to list them all out. Pardy, Minister of Education, the Honorable Krista Lynn Howell, Chair of the Board of Regents, Glenn Barnes, and President and Vice Chancellor pro tempore, Neil Bose. And before we get into the event, I want to acknowledge the space that we live, do our work on, and go to school in. We acknowledge the space is unceded, unsurrendered Beothuk and Mi'kmaq territories. We would also recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, Nunatukavut, and the Innu of Nitassinan, and their ancestors, the original people of Labrador. We acknowledge the land both as an explicit reminder of the historical and ongoing colonialism taking place here in Canada, and as a reminder of the work yet to be done towards decolonization and reconciliation between the Indigenous peoples of this land, settlers, and the people who have been historically and are currently being violently displaced from their home territories. So, now let's go over some ground rules. This is the game plan. We're gonna have a couple questions from me, a couple questions submitted from students, and then we're gonna open the floor to questions from the public. So, what I'm gonna do is, we're gonna do a 3-minute speaking time. Do we decide if, Mackenzie, we have someone that's going to do the timing, or I can also time if somebody wants to give me, can you do the time? Yeah? Okay. Mackenzie's going to do the time. I forgot to tell her. But you're going to have 3 minutes, and at the 2-minute mark, Mackenzie's going to go to, do you want to come sit up here, Mackenzie? Is that okay? So sorry, guys. So at the 2-minute mark, Mackenzie's gonna give you a 2. At the 1-minute mark, you'll get a 1. At the 30-second mark, you'll get a half. And then 10 seconds is gonna count you down. And this way, we won't hurt anyone's feelings, we won't interrupt, because you'll know exactly when your time is up. Now, I think that's about covers it for ground rules. We're gonna try and stop at 9 o'clock. Afterwards, we would really love for everybody to join us for a social. If you want to keep the conversation going, that's possible. We can stay from 9 to about 11 o'clock, have a few beverages. We have some austerity-themed beverages. I don't have a list on me now, but Jawad, do you have a list you can read off?
Yes.
What do we got?
We got tuition refundo, we got tuition twist, we also have
Furey Fire.
We have Furey Fire, and we have austerity.
Austerity. Okay, amazing. So you can check out that menu afterwards at the social at 9 o'clock. So, that being said, let's get into it. Some of the questions may just apply to the university administration, some more be directed at the government and opposition. And I'll try to be fair on who gets to speak when, but I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm not a perfect person. I'll be trying to be as fair as I can. So, let's get started. Here we are again, another year and another budget, devaluing students and the greater Memorial community. Students have gathered members of all three political parties, cabinet minister, the university president, and the chair of the Board of Regents, and we intend to get some accountability. At last year's town hall, students called attention to the back and forth that we've been pulled into since the $68.4 million cut to the tuition offset grant and the subsequent doubling of tuition fees at Memorial University. And the back and forth has been about who is responsible. We want someone to take some accountability. The government has repeatedly stated they had no choice but to cut the Memorial University tuition offset grant because of former President Timmons had informed of their plans to hike tuition regardless. The university has repeatedly stated it had no choice but to hike tuition fees because of the loss of funding. And in the years since, students and staff and the general Memorial University community, parents, prospective students, we've been receiving deflection of responsibility back onto the other body. The reality is that if government and senior administration continue to deflect, students and this province will feel the consequences for years and years to come. The question I'm asking here today, who of the leaders from all sides, be that the administration, members of the government, members of the opposition, are committed to taking accountability for the harm caused, rectifying the $68.4 million cut to the tuition offset grant, and committing to reinstating not only the funding to the tuition offset grant, but the immediate lowering of tuition fees and elimination of differential fees. To start, I will go to Minister Howell. You may have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to join you, and it is certainly encouraging to see so many people participate in these types of town halls and these conversations. And I guess falling on the side of government, it stands to us to make the first comment on this issue. And I think the most important thing, I can't speak to what happened in the Department of Education before June, July of last year, because that's when I first showed up here. But the important thing that our message has been is that we want to continue to support students. So regardless of who was the first one to make the decision or to start the conversation about the tuition freeze being lifted, the ultimate outcome here is that we want to continue to support the students. And the point of the $64 million cut, that was over a course of 4 years, which has not yet been realized. And we're going to continue to work to see what avenues we can establish to support students through that. So I think one of the biggest commitments that we've made is continuing to fund our student financial services and ensuring that education is accessible. So when we're talking about the numbers and the values that go into that, you look at how students may have access to some of this funding. And you'll forgive me, my memory's not as sharp as it was before, so I've got a few numbers written down. But when we look at student loans and grants, those are one of the biggest commitments that we make in the Department of Education. So we continue to put $23 million into financial aid. And this is on a principle, first, when we look at our tuition relief grant, it's in terms of needs-based. So we're applying principles of equity here, giving everybody an opportunity for those who can afford education to be able to pay it on their own terms, and those who cannot have access to these student tuition relief grants. And that's just the upfront portion based on though I'm getting the look down here that my time is running out. But again, our commitment to the students of Newfoundland and Labrador is that we don't want the price of tuition to be a barrier. We want it to be accessible. We want to support students so that there is a contribution towards their education from our student services.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Craig Pardy.
Yes, hello. I've got the phone in front of me, but just timing 3 minutes. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge some of my MUN council that would be here this evening, and these are 4 individuals that are with us on the 5th floor of the education building, and we thought that we do have conversation with them and tap into them about some of the matters that would be pertinent to MUN and students and education in our province. Kobe Greeley, we got Daniel Blackmore, Ben Duggan, and not here tonight, unfortunately couldn't make it, was Emma Tannenberg. So I just want to acknowledge that. Myself and Mr. Dinn have been in education for quite some time in our capacities in the teaching profession. We saw lots of opportunities when I was administrator in Clarenville Middle School, and we saw many opportunities where education wasn't affordable for the students of which we had in our school. We talked about it quite often. We had mentioned in admin council meetings with administrators that we thought, wouldn't it be great if students could leave the K-12 fully funded public system of education and move on to education with it being totally free? And that is something that I think we ought to aspire to. Many people will say, well, we may not be able to afford that, but where we get and how close we get is something that should be a concerted effort, that we have to make it as affordable and, as the minister said, as accessible as we possibly could. If you tracked the data and you went back 12, 13, 14 years and looked at the budgets for education and health spending in our province, you would find that the difference is not so large between the two. It's because education was so important, as important in the budget, pretty closest to what health was. But we know where health has grown in the budget now, 4.2 billion. And we look at where education is, which it hasn't reached $1 billion. So if you look at not that many years ago, we were pretty well on a fair footing. So when I would say value in education, that's something that I think we need to have a look at. Education, I've often said that fishery is our most important industry, but I now stand corrected.
Mr. Furey.
Education is our most important industry.
Thank you, Mr. Pardy. All right. Jim Dinn.
Thank you, folks, for organizing this. If I can't hear, it's not sure if it's me or if it's the acoustics, but I'll probably blame my ears. So Craig is right. Both he and I, between the two of us, probably have close to 70 years of teaching experience, and we see, I say as teachers, the value of education. In terms of its democratizing influence, the fact that you look at the people, better educated people, better health outcomes, you name it. And it's interesting that Craig brought a free system, because I was thinking we both taught in the public school system, which is free. Why is it free? But money, it puts barriers. There's another barrier there. So it's about accessibility. Really, if you're looking at access to post-secondary, it should come down to your academic ability, your credentials, and not the ability to pay. I often think too, we can talk about the affordability, but when we set up bureaucratic process like loans and grants and so on and so forth, we're just adding that extra layer as to who qualifies, who doesn't. I grew up in town. My children grew up in town. They attended post-secondary, but that meant that they didn't have to deal with the worrying about where to put meals, housing, and so on and so forth. So they come out ahead. But I will say this: a lot of people, students who teaching who come out burdened with debt, it influences things as to where you're going to work, what course of study you're going to go into in the first place, and it turns education into a commodity. And that's not what it's about. It's about being able to, I believe, coming out of university or post-secondary, trade, whatever it is, with the ability to choose your future. So I think in many ways the current system is setting up barriers for people who choose to go into post-secondary, whatever it is, and also where they're going to work and how they're going to use that education later. Remove the barriers, treat education as an investment and not a budget line. Thank you.
Now, I remember the last town hall just like it was yesterday, and we had President Bose, but it was not Minister Howell on my right. We had the minister at the time of the tuition hike was the Minister of Education, Tom Osborne. And last year, if you remember, it was very memorable, like I said, we had a bit of a disagreement between Mr. Bose and Mr. Osborne, where Mr. Osborne insisted, and now Mr. Bose was perhaps aware of some of these conversations, but Mr. Osborne insisted that it was the university who came to propose to government that we want to raise tuition. Boo. But the recollection may be different for some, because there wasn't really a consensus on who said what and who started what. And I guess that doesn't really matter now. But I think the important part is, if the government comes and says, you know what, we made a mistake, we want to give you back the $68.4 million Memorial University, would you put that back into students' pockets? Would that go right back into lowering tuition? That's my question for you, Dr. Bose, and to Glenn Burns. Let's start with Bose.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to come and talk tonight. It's always good to hear concerns of students and the comments that you've got, questions and comments. One of the first things I'd say is that just released data from StatsCan shows that students in Newfoundland, undergraduate students, have the lowest level of debt in Canada on graduation, except for Quebec. So that's something to keep in mind. To go back to the question that John has just raised, increasing the tuition we're getting some feedback there. Increasing the tuition had been a recommendation for many people, outside and inside government, over a long, long time, including the government's post-secondary education review. Because the tuition freeze way back in 1998, as of 2022, was no longer sustainable. We work constantly with the government. We're discussing ways of which...
Do you mind putting the mic a little closer to your face? Sorry, Dr. Bose. Do you mind just putting the mic close to your mouth just so this side can hear you?
Okay. So we work closely with government on a regular basis, and we're looking at ways in which those cuts over these 5 years of the $68.4 million, how it's impacting the universities. It's having a big impact, and we need to find ways to offset that, and that it's through discussion that we hope to be able to achieve how to sustain the university as strong as possible over the coming years.
So, Mr. Bose, you didn't answer the second part of the question. If the university was going to give the $68.4 million back to, if the government was going to give the $68.4 million back to the university, would that go towards lowering tuition?
We would certainly look at all the fees that students have and see what, where it makes sense to alleviate extra costs. It's also true that the undergraduate education costs of Memorial University are the lowest in Atlantic Canada. So we need to make sure that the university is sustainable going forward, and so it's an overall equation of what the actual government grant is at the time and what we can do going forward.
Thank you. Glenn Barnes, Chair of the Board of Regents. What is your take on both the past and the future when it comes to tuition offset grant?
What I'll speak to really is the second part of your question. The first part is best left to Dr. Bose. If the money came back, would it go in the pocket of students? Of course, that's something that the full board would have to certainly consider and debate. It's not my decision to make singularly for sure. But you know, I would hope that it would go back in students' pockets directly or indirectly, either way. Remember that our budget lines are quite extensive. We have to find money to pay for everything as university. Our heating bill, for example, this past winter increased by $5 million over what was budgeted. So that's just one example. We had to find $5 million. And on it goes. Like we all know, we all face it. We're not alone in expenses increases. Memorial, of course, is no different. I would like to think that any time more money is injected into any organization, and ours in particular, it would certainly take pressure off what we would have to charge students, I would think, because there's more money available in the pot, as it were, and certainly that helps everyone out. But we have to proportion our money around. We have a budget, balance it around as best we can. We do have to heat buildings. We do have to pay staff. We do have to snow clear, and on it goes. And we will always endeavor to keep tuition as low as we possibly can while we provide good education facilities as best we can. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Now, it is interesting we hear Dr. Bose talk about some other voices inside and outside government that have been looking to defund the university. Back in 2020, as I'm sure many of you all remember, the great Dame Moya Green was enlisted to start the Premier's Economic Recovery Plan. And in this plan, it actually presents the exact scheme of defunding the university and cutting the tuition offset grant that came into fruition in 2022. But in the same plan, we have the words, with an aging population and a decline in birth rates, young people of this province will have to be more productive and better educated as they build and power the new economy. So from the same principle that's saying to defund education, make it harder to get a degree, where you see right away a 20% drop, 400 less students getting enrolled in the undergraduate program. It talks about the importance of education in terms of getting us out of this mess. Another quote, Finance Minister Siobhan Cody in the House of Assembly, a child born in this province today owes debt as its birthright. Isn't that something? A 2022 report shows that MUN undergraduate students, mostly young people who make up only 2.2% of the total population, with the cuts to MUN and the cuts to the tuition offset grant, will shoulder 29% of the deficit for the year 2020 2025 to 2026. So when we're talking about the debt of the province and the need for economic recovery, how do you balance making it harder to get an education while needing a more educated workforce? I'll pass that to Minister Howell.
Thank you, and I guess the most important part that I took out of that is the importance of education identified in the Green Report. And that's something that we've recognized as well, and a need for change in how we do education. And one of the most recent announcements that we've made in the Department of Education is to launch an education accord. And that's going to take a look at education from pre-K, early learning, through our K-12 system, into our post-secondary institutions, and to our learning in seniors and lifelong learners as they grow and continue to develop. And I think it's fair to say that everybody in this room, after living through the last number of years in a pandemic type of situation, has learned to grow and adapt and change how we do things. And we've seen ways that our education system can be more productive. We've seen ways that we can provide services to students through different platforms in different settings. And those are things that we want to take a look at and realize for our systems, from, as I said, from our early learning straight through to our lifelong learners. And I think there's a large piece of that puzzle that revolves around our post-secondary institutions and how they can provide services that would change and shape our education workforce as they go out into the world. You know, we can't do things the same way we've always done them and expect to have different outcomes. But when we look at the way that the world is turning and the place where Newfoundland and Labrador finds itself now in the economy with the opportunities that are on the horizon for us, it's important that we take a new look, a fresh stance on how we do these things, and making sure that those opportunities are there for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians right here at home. So we want to continue to do that, to build on some of that good work. And that may require changes in our models of how we do things, our funding. Taking a look at some of the resources that we've planted in our post-secondary institutions. Some of them may be going great and working well for us, and some of them may be mundane and outdated. And we might have to figure out how we can do that differently to supply a resource to the students of today and the students of tomorrow and the future who will lead Newfoundland and Labrador in whatever the recovery of our economy looks like. We can't accomplish it without the students of Memorial University and the other post-secondary institutions in our province.
So, Mr. Howell, how do you balance the need for more workforce, more highly educated workforce, more productivity of young people, with making it harder for them to do exactly what you say needs to be done? We've seen a 20% drop in enrollment in 2022. We've had 400 less people enroll, and if it's consistent with this year as well. We're going to see 410 years, we'll have 4,000 less undergraduate students get a degree and join the workforce. How do you balance this? Seems completely counterintuitive to be cutting funding to education while claiming it's the key to our recovery.
So I'd just like to take a moment to address your enrollment issue. And no disrespect to my friends on the other side of the podium, but I have to say that some of our other post-secondary institutions have seen increases in their enrollment. They've seen a rise in some of the classes and course offerings that they've had, and they've stepped it up when it comes to marketing and student recruitment. And they've done a great job, and our post-secondary institutions have recognized an increase in their enrollment in some of the key sectors of development here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So when you give consideration to that fact, along with the fact that there are definitely fewer students to go around, I think it's important to recognize that other institutions also get a piece of that pie, so that maybe not everybody is registering at Memorial, but they are indeed entering into post-secondary institutions, gaining an education, and becoming contributing members. So I don't think it's fair to say that we're not getting the value out of the students, and I think, she said, Dane Green said that students had to be more productive, or a new workforce had to be more productive. And I don't think it's fair to say that. A lot of times you live you live and you learn and you work smarter, not harder. So I think that's where we find ourselves now with the workforce that's coming behind us. They've adapted, they've got new technologies, new ways of thinking, and that might not necessarily be reflected in this institution, but it is reflected across Newfoundland and Labrador through our post-secondary sector.
Mr. Pardy.
We'll give everyone 4 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
4 minutes. 4 minutes, yes.
Thank you, John. Seems to be a bit counterintuitive that you, I think on your question, when you look at needing more graduates in many areas within our province that we are facing a crisis in, that we do make it more expensive for them to attend. And I think a lot of people would look at that as saying that's maybe a little counterintuitive. Myself and Mr. Dinn attended a estimates. Estimates is a process during the budget process where you go into an area and you'd ask questions. You go line by line with the budget. It's like an oversight mechanism that you would ask questions on each one, and any discrepancy from last year to this year, you probe further. You had in social worker, or in social work, in children, seniors, and social development, on Thursday, we discovered that of the 367 places that we have for social workers in our province, we currently have 109 vacancies. One could look at that as a quarter of your workforce that you would count that are out there making a difference in Newfoundland and Labrador in the welfare of adults and children. That is a crisis, and that is very significant. We all hear about health, and I'm sure you're all aware of the shortages that we face in health. The other would be education, and education is struggling. And if we look at those three big entities, then it is the students that are going to pass through this institution that is going to make a difference in filling those vacancies. So I would say what you pay is significant. How significant it is for our economy and for our population, data would show that the greater the education of residents of Newfoundland and Labrador, the less of a chance they will be living in food insecure homes. I think we all realize that, and that is the value of education. So we've got to make sure that it is totally accessible and affordable. And what that line is and what it is that we have, we've got to make sure that we don't miss that mark as to where that threshold is. If, as John has stated, that, and I wasn't aware of that, John, if we saw a 20% drop in enrollment in 2022, as reported, then that is really, really brutally significant for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So if that is the case, if 400 less undergraduate students enrolling, that is very significant. So we've got to make sure we address the needs that are in the province, the shortfalls that we have, and we need to make sure that, again, the university and access is affordable and accessible. If we miss it, then the crisis that we say we have now is going to go on longer, and then quite conceivably, it manifests itself into getting worse in certain areas, i.e., that number of social workers that we don't have and we're shortfall in the public service, that is rather significant. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dinn.
I'm going to come at it some facts and figures. You know, I finished my university degree in 1981, so I'm ancient. But it's in, you know, when I was first here, our library was the Henrietta Pardy Library. And I'll start out by also saying, I should have started out by saying, I still believe that education as an investment. For years...
Just your mic close.
For years, there had been a move to try to get new Queen Elizabeth new library from Memorial University built. Government funding never came through, but it was in 1978 that students at the time decided to put their money, the money that they had saved for a new student center, a building fund, towards that new library that government came across with its share. Did what it should have done before that. That's where that new library came from. Because the students saw the value if government didn't see the value. Education has changed, has been keeping up with modern times. I guess in my time as a teacher, and I would say for Mr. Pardy, we've seen the changes. What's been consistent or constant in all of this is the lack of resources that come from government and how they treat education as a budget line, period. The average cost, if I'm looking at here, for a domestic Canadian studies degree is something like $27,000. That's just for the degree itself. For an international student, $90,000. Think about that. Where are you going to go when you finish your degree, if you even start that degree? Are you going to hang around here, or are you going to go somewhere else to try to get that back? But think about the burden you're saddled with. A KPMG study also talks about the value of the university, what it contributes to the economy. In its operational grant, $293 million of GDP, 5,401 jobs annually, $413 million in labor income annually. Capital expenditure, $67 million to the GDP, 574 jobs. Student expenditures, what you spend in the run what you contribute to the GDP, $210 million annually, 3,095 jobs. People who come to visit you, your relatives or anyone else comes in to the $55 million to the GDP, 850 jobs created annually. So think about this. The university is already, according to this economic impact assessment, is already contributing significantly to the economy of this province. You are contributing significantly to the economy of this province. I think when we talk about that balance, maybe it's about time to invest in students as well, the ones who are paying the tuition now and are hoping to live here at some point. So from my point of view, if we want to make sure it's inclusive, education is inclusive, then make it accessible, make it affordable, and allow young people when they finish to decide how they can begin their life without being saddled with a huge debt. And that's going to impact their ability of what, if they buy a house, if they have a family, where they're going to work. Simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for bringing up that amazing piece of MUN history that is too often forgotten. Instead of the student union building a new Thompson Student Center with the fund raised by students, we so generously and thoughtfully gave it instead to have a library. So thank you for remembering that, Jim. Now I will pass it to Dr. Bose. There seems. What do you make of the enrollment issue? Do you think that MUN is dropping the ball, or are we losing the 400 from 2022 to other institutions, or are we tracking those people, seeing where they're going?
Well, I'll back up to the original question and I'll come back to that. First of all, Memorial is the economic driver for the province. The number of Newfoundland students leaving school is actually dropping. But when you go out and look at the professionals in the Newfoundland economy, about 66,000 of 100,000 Memorial alumni work in the province, and they are the doctors, the teachers, the engineers and the health workers who work here in the province. So John referred to, I think you called it 20%, it was actually a 90% drop in Newfoundland students coming, undergraduate students in I forget the year after, 2022, who enrolled. They were St. John's students only, and they were on the St John's campus only. And when you look at the number of the drop-in undergraduates across all of the university, it was actually 3.8% that year, and there was an increase of 8% in graduate enrolment at the same time. The enrolment in Memorial has stayed relatively stable, but there was an increase in enrolment during COVID, and that was reflected in those numbers in between 2021 and 2022. This year, the drop from 2022 to 2023 is actually 1.6%, and again, it's an there was an increase in graduate enrolment. There has been an increasing trend in international students, and that has actually also offset the drop in students coming out of the school system in Newfoundland. And those international students are more active in generating industry startups in Newfoundland. More than half of the clients and owners in the Genesis incubator system are actually international entrepreneurs, and they are adding to the innovation and startups which will drive the economic development in the province. Thank you.
Well, I agree with you there. I did get the numbers a bit wrong. It wasn't 20%, it was actually 19.1% in the St. John's campus, so a 0.9 off there. But I do disagree with you on the overall numbers, because the Grenfell campus number was a lower drop, but it was only 17.3 or something like that. But overall, there's still 400 less undergraduates in the St. John's campus, and I think somewhere in that 50 or 60 less in Grenfell, but that's the most recent.
The highest enrollment at Memorial ever was 19,405 in 2021. The enrollment now is 18,900 and something. It's still very, very high.
It is, but we're an undergraduate student union. I care about undergraduates. And you know, as much as I think graduate unions are important and graduate students are important, the undergraduate student number are down by 20%, and that's consistent.
The undergraduate numbers were only down by 3.8% in 2022 across the board, part-timers and the whole lot at Memorial that year.
Well, I'm using your numbers. I'm using the numbers from the MUN website, but the number does change, but it's still the 20%. Hasn't recovered that 20%. We're still we're still keeping that. We haven't regained those 20% back in the undergraduate.
20% is a cherry-picked number of one group of students.
We're an undergraduate student union. We care about the undergraduate enrollment, and that's what I'm going to keep talking about. As I don't consider it a cherry-picked number. Mr. Burns, you have anything to say?
I don't really have anything to add to that. Dr. Bose has explained it well, and that's his area. My area of expertise and the board is to manage the money and the property and the resources and provide as best we can so the education and research can be carried out.
All right, enough of me. I'm getting too grumpy. Let's get a question. Jawad, we got a question from the crowd. All right, so no, it's we have the student question. Sorry, it's not open to the crowd yet. I totally messed up. We have student submitted questions that we're going to get to read out. Then we'll get the questions from the crowd. Thank you.
Okay, hi. My question is, remove my mask so you can hear me. My question is, following up on last year's question on grants and loans, Memorial University considers 3 courses to be full-time, and the federal government considers 3 courses to be full-time. But in order to qualify for provincial grants and loans, you have to be in 4 courses. So why is there no consistency across the levels of administration here?
I'll take that one. Thank you for that question, and it's something that the Student Union had brought to us when we had our meeting and had our discussion, and it's something that I've taken back to my counterparts in the federal government. I think it's a bit of a regulatory change that needs to happen, but it is very much in process, because as you said, it needs to be streamlined, and both need to be considered. If we're applying the same principles in one realm, then they have to apply the same in the other in terms of our grants and loans. So something that we are actively working on, and then as we can have those conversations with our federal counterparts to line things up. It sometimes takes a little longer than I would like things to move, but certainly on our radar, and we're working on it actively.
Mr. Pardy.
I'm glad the minister is working on it. I know in coming from the K-12 system as being an administrator, we knew that we had very capable students that were quite able to go to post-secondary, but sometimes they need to have a reduced course load. It didn't mean that they weren't able to succeed. It just meant that they needed a reduced course load. So I would fully hope that 3 courses would equate to a full-time student, to make sure that we capture as many residents and potential students in Newfoundland and Labrador who have the capability of attending MUN, that we make it attractive and make it possible for them. So if that's in the works, I think that's wonderful, and that's where it ought to be. Thank you.
There is no, to me, the simple issue is pick the number, pick 3. That is simplified. I don't know how much negotiation we need on that. Make it as, I guess, as easy as possible for people to access. Now, when I went to university, we did 5 courses, but if I remember correctly, too, even at that time, 3 was considered full time. To me, it shouldn't take years of negotiation or anything along those lines. What is it that's going to help students access education and come out, whether they come out in 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, if this makes it accessible and makes it financially viable, relieves the stress of it, you name it, 3 works for me.
Mr. Bose, I really don't mean to be quarreling with you. I'm really much more upset with Minister Howell, to be honest. The cuts to education, but go ahead, Mr. Bose.
Yes, so on this issue, we've been talking and constantly actually with the Minister on the accessibility of students to for the loans and grants programs. And I think there has been an open invitation to MUNSU to meet with the Department of Education to discuss not only this issue of what's a full-time student, but also other roadblocks that restrict access of students to these programs. And I think that is something that I would certainly support very strongly, for the students to come to the table and have those discussions to ensure that the best access is available to those in need, truly in need.
And I guess I'd just like to add that it's not even a negotiation. We accepted that as the number that we should use. It's just simply because of the way that the student aid is stacked. In order to qualify for one line, then you have to meet the requirements in the second line and in the third line and all of those things. So it's not that we're renegotiating what the definition of a part-time, full-time student is. It's that making sure we get it in the right place so that you don't get consequentially bumped out of line 3 because you didn't meet the requirement in line 2. So it's just a simple change in regulation.
And yeah, I believe we have came to the table. This is the 4th time it's been raised. It was raised once last year, twice in our 2 meetings, and again now. And we may have had the opportunity if we were at the table for the inaugural meeting of the Educational Board, but unfortunately, no students were there. All right. Another question, Mr. Barnes. Did you have a chance to comment? Another question from Jawad. Do you have someone lined up for another question?
I recently, I guess still recently, graduated from nursing from Western Regional School of Nursing, and nursing students, including myself, work approximately 1,600 hours unpaid for their placements to get the degree. With the cost of living increasing, including tuition, rent, and grocery prices, nurses are working full-time on top of their full-time placements. So with all this being said, should nursing students be expected to work and burn out before they begin as a registered nurse? Should they be expected to work for free?
I'll take the first shot at that one as well, because you're preaching to the choir on that one. A registered nurse by trade, and also spent a significant amount of time in the clinical setting. So I will reserve my personal convictions about some of the work that I did and how some of the relations with our registered nursing, assigned nurses and counterparts unfolded in terms of the clinical setting. But when you look at the time that is required to achieve those skills and to actually fulfill the requirements of your degree, it is a significant investment. So this was something that also came up in our meeting with MUNSU, and as recently as last week had this conversation with some of my counterparts in the Department of Health and Community Services about what solutions we could possibly bring, what we could offer to some of the student body that is required to invest this significant amount of time in clinical. So again, something that we'll put on the table for future discussions, any solutions, any options that you think are viable and acceptable to students. We'll certainly be interested in that, with the full understanding that, you know, a registered nurse versus a nursing student can't be receiving the same amount of pay. The duties are certainly not the same, nor is the accountability and responsibility at the end of the day on the license. But the hours and the investment of the students, and as you said, the personal toll that it does take on the students is something that has to be considered when we look at some of these professions that require clinical placement times.
Yeah, I mean, 1,600 hours to work for free while trying to afford your cost of living. And I mean, a government that is so desperately in need of recruitment and retention. You know, and we're looking at the expenditures with over 750 registered nursing vacancies and the expenditures of over $100 million to private companies for travel nursing. Some of these companies getting paid up to $300 per hour. Do you think paid work terms would go a long way toward fixing that problem with recruitment, retention?
I think you leveraged the conversation that I had with the Department of Health, is that, you know, when we look at recruitment efforts and how can we entice people to be part of these professions that, in all honesty, have probably not been portrayed in a great light over the past few years, and we're struggling to find professionals to fill these roles. So any means that we can use to recruit students into our nursing profession is something that we're interested in talking about, as well as retaining them once we get them there. And I know from personal experience, when you do take a student nurse, that's an additional amount of work that's on the nurse in the workplace. So we want to give consideration to that as well. And if there's a way that we can make that process a little smoother for the registered nurses that are in these positions, then we want to consider that too. So that's really where our conversation stemmed from when we started talking about potential for some type of relief for students who are in these clinical placements.
Thank you. Mr. Pardy.
Thank you, John. I probably should have stated at the start, Tony Wakeham was supposed to be here tonight, and unfortunately he couldn't attend because of the family medical matter that was going on. So he had asked me to take his place, so I ought to have mentioned that from the start. Really glad that you've chosen nursing, and I know that we have a deficit, as I stated earlier, and as we are all aware. We firmly believe in our party that you ought to be paid for your work term within your profession, especially while we have a deficit in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in your profession. Ought you be paid the same as an RN? That's not the expectation. I think when medical doctors go out and do their residency, they're probably paid, I think, a nominal fee of $60,000 a year. That doesn't equate to what the physician's salary would be, but it helps them bridge to get to that full-time employment. So we don't want to face any undue hardship. I think you should have your work term compensated to a set amount, and I think that would only be fair. One thing that our party has stood for and asked, I'm not sure if you've been offered full-time employment in the system. We are firm believers that with the extreme shortage that we have, and John had said about the reliance on the travel nurses and so on, is that we firmly believe that if you are in your graduating year, you ought to be offered full-time employment and know that you will have that full-time employment in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. But the unpaid work terms is something that students ought not to have to face. It's another investment into a program that I think will help the transition into the profession. I've often equate to teachers. Government will often assign teachers to 1/4 of a permanent unit out in remote parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And that teacher will have to go out to those remote parts, and they'll have to look at their transportation, they'll have to get accommodations, they'll have to look after or feed themselves, all on 1/4 of a unit. So sometimes we pose some injustices out there in the areas of which we're trying to make sure that we fill and have our quota professionals out there. So there are little things like that that are significant. It's a small fix to be able to know that we compensate those who are doing work terms, and that ought to be done, especially in the areas of which we got a deficit. Thank you.
Mr. Dinn.
Definitely. And not only for nursing students, education students, social worker students. I know that whether it's engineering or business, they're paid work terms. Even if they're in government departments, they're getting paid. They're not doing it for free. I will tell you that under the Education Act, it was the duty of any teacher to basically take a student intern. And I always found it bothersome, disturbing, irritating that a student teacher would come in who was paying full tuition. At one time, we did have a stipend as the cooperating teacher, and I don't know what it is now, but at that time we did have it taken away from us. And I often felt if indeed you're going to do that, maybe there's a way of refunding or cutting the tuition fee for teachers, for student teachers. It's interesting that the 3 professions I just mentioned are female dominated. In the education system right now, anywhere from 70 to 75% of the workforce are female. And in some ways, I can't help but thinking if indeed there is that underlying belief that, well, it's devalued. It's not as valuable as the work that done by professions that were predominantly male. So at some point, if you're trying to send a clear message that the work you do to a young student is important, then it's important to pay with that. They are not full-time, they're not fully qualified nurses, teachers, and so on and so forth. It's part of the development, but for God's sake, pay them as well, or give them some discount in the tuition so that they're not struggling. And then come out with like as my colleague Craig said, like these fractional units are, I think, discouraging. They're an insult because you're never doing 25% of the work. You're doing full-time work. Talking to one father who talked with his daughter who's been a social worker in the department for the last 3 years, casual. Not full-time, casual. There is a problem there. And give these professions the respect they deserve. Pay the students.
President Bose.
I agree. I worked for 20 years in the teaching in the co-op engineering program here, and subsequent years in a similar partial co-op program in Australia. And one of the points about engineering work terms is they must be paid, and I think these work terms should be paid too.
Chair Barnes.
My wife is a retired registered nurse. Started training in Halifax 49 years ago. I know, I'm just giving it away. In those days, the BN program was just beginning in its infancy everywhere, really. So the program in Halifax then was 2 years. At the same time, it was 3 years here. It always amazed us that my wife got her qualifications in Halifax after 2 years, wrote her RNs. We moved back here. She went to work at the Health Sciences OR as a fully qualified RN. But the people alongside of her, they had to go an extra year, 3 years, to get exactly the same qualification, to make exactly the same money. But the third year of the 3 year was more or less free labor. It was just always absolutely astonishing to me, and still is. So like everybody out there, absolutely everybody should be paid for what they do. Thanks.
Is there another submitted question? Yes. Go ahead.
Hi folks, my name is Josh Leposki. I'm a professor of geography. I'm also the current president of the faculty union. My question is very straightforward, mostly for the government side. So since 2014, the overall budget for MUN has been cut every single year. We're now at 46.8% less than we were in 2014 with inflation-adjusted dollars. So to Minister Howell, and then to the other members of government, Minister Howell, would your government commit to refund MUN to where it was in 2014 with inflation-adjusted dollars? Other members of government, if you were in power, would you commit to that refund MUN back to where it was in 2014? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. And I guess it would be easy for me to sit here and write a check that I don't have cash. I could say absolutely without doubt that I would give it back. But when we look at some of the things that the budget that has been in decline, we've been able to put some of that money back into the hands of the students. And even though we did do the tuition, we stopped the tuition freeze, the money that was supposed to be coming off every year hasn't been fully realized yet. So each year we've done a decrease, but it has never been to the full amount. So we're not at where we had projected to be, because there's been investment back into students. And one of those examples is the campus renewal fee. And that was a amount of money that has been put directly back into the pockets of our students, $500 that would have normally been added on to their fees. So that's it was a $10 million commitment last year. It only required $6.5 million to get everybody that refund. So that's where our benchmark is for this year, but fully recognizing if there's more to be paid, then we can definitely have that conversation. Simply because it did not end up in a budget line doesn't mean we can't have further discussion and move on it. So, as I said, it would be easy for me to sit here and say, yes, I wish I could give you the check and then here you can go. But, you know, in terms of the investment that is in Memorial University, we're talking about $298 million operating grant and an additional $70 million for a med school, an additional $2 million for satellite sites. So there has to be significant accountability measures that are in place. So we can't just say, yes, here's your money. But we can certainly look at where those things are going, how we can better invest into the university. And I think that's part of what we hope to accomplish through the review, through our accord, and seeing what really needs to be funded more robustly and what may be something mundane that we no longer have to deal with. So the commitment to continue looking at how we can support Memorial University is there for sure. It is the largest institution in our province, and it is certainly one of the most prestigious points of discussion and one of the things that we wear proudly as a government of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we want to make sure that we continue that investment and make sure that we have it right-sized to fit what it is that's needed here.
On that point, MUN currently has a deferred maintenance budget of over $450 million. We're seeing a university that used to be, a point of pride in governments, where Joey Smallwood had free tuition because he wanted Newfoundlanders to have an education and to be able to, not have to go to Nova Scotia and Ontario, and only the few could. I'm not believing that this government believes in MUN. I don't see them investing. I see them taking away investment. I see since 2015, the cuts, the fees that they've been adding on. Yes, we've gotten rid of the campus renewal fee, and that's a great start. But we still have the student services fee of $100. We still have a doubling of tuition. People are paying twice as much. And at the end of the 5-year scheme to get rid of the tuition offset grant, there's still going to be $11 million unaccounted for. This administration has been left in a lurch to a certain extent, where there is a $450 million bill of deferred maintenance. And when I see infrastructure investment by this government, I'm not seeing it in MUN.
So I guess that's probably a question that's better suited to the president on how they allocate their funds for some of their work and their infrastructure. But I would think it's a bit naive to suggest that almost $500 million investment in Memorial University is a lack of confidence in a university, or makes it seem as though we don't believe in Memorial University. So when you look at the investment that is made by the government, Memorial University is 70% funded by the provincial government. That's the highest, one of the highest, if not the highest subsidized university in the country. So that is certainly a significant investment, and certainly I would think, and the taxpayers would certainly think, that if you're investing that much money in something, it's something that you have confidence in and want to see succeed.
I think a cut every single year since 2014 doesn't give me that impression. But let's move on to Mr. Pardy.
Is it 4 minutes again?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No more back and forth.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Joshua, for the question. This government doesn't believe in indexing. The minister can probably enlighten us if there's somewhere in the government programming of which we are indexed. I know that income support isn't. I know that when on our income supplement for seniors, provincial or federal government would index the seniors' benefit and pay them, but while they increase the amount due to the remaining threshold, which is back in 2014-15, then they claw back money. So I think your question would be, since that time you had said 2014-15, there's been no indexing. I remember my wife, two of my 4 children who attended MUN just recently convocated, and I can recall my wife saying to me quite frequently, "Craig, have you seen the campus fees are going up again?" And she looked at it as being one that with the tuition, then the campus fees were increasing. And I probably should have researched that a little more to see as to what she was referencing in the campus fees. We need to make it as affordable as possible. When Minister Howell states that, if she had the money and the resources, then yes, she would write the check. We realize that. When the government came in 2015, we were, I think you may have referenced, 15 billion in debt at that time. We are 30 billion in debt now. John mentioned earlier about the figure and the debt load that we have in the province, between 36 to 38,000 for every woman, man, and child in the province. And that is an astronomical amount. That's a lot. But what takes us out of where we are is education. And I firmly believe that. A drop, as President Bose had said, of 3.8%, that might seem small. I looked at that as being a large drop as well. And it's a large drop because everything has a reason. If it's because of affordability, we ought not to be making it tough for anybody in Newfoundland and Labrador to come here and to study and to be valuable members of society going forward. So we've got to think of what we do. Tony Wakeham has said several times, and I would hope that he said it publicly. There, John, I would stand. He has stated to us, I know as a caucus, that if in government, we would give a tax rebate to those graduates that come out of MUN that would get them back their tuition and what they paid. And that would incentivize them staying to be beneficial members of our economy in Newfoundland and Labrador. I remember in the teaching profession, we needed teachers. We were slow getting out to interview for teachers, and eventually we had Northwest Territories, other provinces coming in, signing contracts with teachers that went through our system, and they were gone while we had a deficit. So we've got to do things a little differently. To incentivize it will keep people here, and I would think, yes, we've got to make it more affordable. Thank you.
Thank you. The minister has talked about the education accord, and the premier has announced it as basically the plan to reimagine the education system, to modernize it, to prepare for the new global economy. Well, what is the new global economy? At least as I hear it, it's about innovation. It's about preparing for the future. And what are the centers of innovation? It's going to be our post-secondary institutions, MUN, College of the North Atlantic, Marine Institute, you name it. They are the centers of innovation. They're the ones that are going to prepare Newfoundland and Labrador for that reimagined future, if that's what it's about. We're embarking upon wind hydrogen. This is, you look at any of the I guess, the economic plans we've got, they are technical, they require innovation. This is where you invest. I've already talked about how a reference facts from the KMPG report that showed how MUN contributes directly to the economy, how its graduates contribute to the economy. Invest in it. I will say this. It's great, and I will support putting money into the pockets of students, but it's also important to put money into the pockets to attract and retain instructors, professors to teach the students, because what's going to attract a student here is, besides affordable tuition, as quality individuals, and you've got to retain them, and also about having a facility that is able to have a facility that inspires that I guess that innovative approach. So we've had, and by the way, to me, spend money on infrastructure where you need to spend it. Making up a 46% deficit, definitely. And I think from us, our point of view, we will be sitting down and looking at, if we were ever in government ourselves, it'll be looking at a plan to restore that. But right now, we've got infrastructure that, to me, we've seen some government spending on infrastructure that probably didn't really need to be, that could be put towards the university. A piece of metal falls off St. Clair's, we need a new hospital. Even though the one talking to the doctors there, talking to the health professionals, the hospital's fine. We have a new school that was uncalled for, not a priority, when other schools were in need of renovations and building. We've got a new hospital down in Stavanger Drive. So I guess in many ways, when we look at investment, where do we invest? If it's about restoring the funding so that Memorial can maintain its status and also take care of the maintenance that it needs. then that's where it should be. That's what's needed. If we can build a new hospital required because a piece of metal falls out the front, then for God's sake, making sure that the facilities of this institution are maintained and that we attract high-quality people to learn and to teach here is just as important, maybe more important.
Dr. Bose.
I think, Josh, it's probably even longer than from 2014, at least back to 2012, that Memorial has seen drops in its operating grant. Numbers I have, a 55 million drop from 2012 to about 2022 or so, and then, as you know, the 68.4 kicking in. We're committed to work with the department to find ways to keep Memorial funded. The Minister mentioned the campus renewal fee and others. We are also starting discussions about how we can address deferred maintenance. It is a big issue for the university, and we don't have the solutions yet. I would point out, just to answer Craig's point, also, that 3.8% drop that you referred to came following the years of COVID, where the enrolment in Memorial was particularly high for the reasons that people were at home and did enroll in Memorial. Our enrolment was the highest ever in those 2 years. And so that 3.8% was probably a normal drop as people started to do, as students started to do other things. And those students were right across the age groups too. Thank you.
Mr. Burns?
Physical infrastructure is very much what the Board of Regents deals with, of course, and it is an extraordinary challenge. I don't need to tell anybody, of course, you all walk around here. We've got some buildings that we're proud of and are new and a good addition, but we have a lot of others which we just sort of go as we walk through. You know, I used to be, when I was bigger in business, had visitors come quite often, or relatives, and I'd give the tour around the area. And one of the areas that I always would take them proudly was to drive through and around Memorial University and say, look at our university, look at this huge facility we have. It's good or better than any in Atlantic Canada. Very proud of it. I don't do that as much any longer. I kind of close my eyes as I drive past. You know, and we're extraordinarily challenged to try to stretch our dollars and maintain the properties as best we can. Now, having said that, I don't particularly want to pay more taxes than I'm paying now. I bet you don't. I bet your parents don't. So it really boils down to, you know, these things cost money, and it's like any budget. The Board of Regents putting the money on the table, putting the piles of cash, and so much money here, so much money there. Same as you would it in your household, and I'm sure the government does the same thing. There's a fixed amount of money that you have to spread around and do your best with. And of course, we are no different, certainly. So the approach we're really taking is, yes, we're trying to keep buildings up as best we can, but it's also saying, okay, where's Memorial University going? What's it going to look like in 5 and 10 years? What infrastructure will be necessary? So we embarked on very early days on asking ourselves those questions, and we're hoping that Senate will ask themselves the same questions because of course academia, academic programs, you know, that is what drives the Board of Regents to provide space and people and warm buildings to deliver those things, and research and so on as well. So we kind of have to have an idea where we're going. How many students do we think we might have going forward? Because that's going to drive how many classrooms, how many this, how many that. We've already done a space study. We know exactly how many hours a day and a week our space is utilized, and so we're looking for efficiencies everywhere we can. So we're looking on that side of the equation, is that, you know, we're realistic enough to know that there's not a huge pot of money coming forward because I don't think it's there. So we're looking at, okay, how can we build more innovative? Do we need all our buildings? Do we need to build one? Do we need to tear some down? Some classrooms, labs are not occupied enough of the time. So maybe we need to occupy them more often. Now that's not the Board of Regents area, of course, scheduling the space and so on. But I use that by example, is that we're looking at efficiencies, how to save money. We're replacing one of the oil burning furnaces over that the government is kindly funding. Well, you know, that's about, of course, it's not about saving money, it's about the environment. But Boise will never save money over time. So these are all examples, and there are more and more and more. So we're trying to take that kind of approach to the best we can with our money. Thank you.
Now, yeah, I won't ask you more questions. There's a lot more questions, but the one thing I want to pick up on is the old taxpayer burden that the university plays. And maybe one of these days I would have been convinced by it, but there's no way in hell I think that the $68.4 million of savings that this cut is giving to taxpayers is going to be worth it with the damage it's doing to our economy. I think with the way that this government is spending, in 2021 they gave $500 million to the oil companies. In the next year, they gave another almost $68 million in subsidies. And then we have almost $1 billion of P3 projects in the past few years as well. So I don't really see this as a question of fiscal prudence. But I will shut up now. Let's get another question.
Hello there. Building on the question regarding nursing. Similarly, social work students in their program work over 800 hours of unpaid placements and often have no choice where they take these placements. 369 social work positions in the Department of Children and Seniors and Social Development, 105 are vacant. Education students also exceed that with 800 hours of unpaid labor. Given this province's emphasis on retaining young workers, can we secure a commitment to compensate these students fairly through a policy amendment?
Mr. Howell.
So the same answer would apply to the social work students, to the education students, to some of our early learning students that find themselves in placements that require clinical hours that aren't compensated. It's certainly a discussion that we've been having. It's a tool that we're looking at in terms of how we can recruit more qualified professionals and how we can build a stronger workforce while relieving some of the burden on our students. So definitely something that we're actively discussing, and any suggestions in terms of what compensation should look like or what you feel would be acceptable, we do welcome that to the department.
Oh, you go ahead, sir.
No, I concur. I think they act. We stated a little earlier, I think we focused in and drilled in on the nurses, but I think all of those areas ought to have their clinical hours and their internships covered.
You won't get any disagreement from me. I would say certainly the one thing that three of us are probably going to agree on, because sometimes we all did that unpaid labor and unremunerated labor. So to me, I've often thought it was very unfair that not only are you not getting paid, but you're still paying tuition. So in many ways, it's said to me, paying an intern is also about sending a clear message that the work you're doing is indeed valuable and it's important. And it sends a clear message to them, and if nothing else, when you leave, when you get your degree, that I've accomplished something, I've contributed, and I feel like it is valuable. So definitely, and that's social work and teaching as well.
President Bose.
I agree.
Then you want to take that one? Or?
Ditto.
Okay, next. What do we got next?
We do love the short answers, so there's a lot of people on my list, so love the sensitivity to the time.
Okay, first off, I wanted to say first, just in case it doesn't get said, Dr. Bose, you said that the 19.1 was a cherry-picked number, but that's ridiculous because when we talk about 19.1, we're talking about first-year enrollment, and those are the only students that were impacted last year by the tuition hike. Besides obviously there was a 4% increase for everyone, but the actual extreme tuition hike was only first-year students. So if you're talking about the overall number, it doesn't make sense to use that when we're talking about the impact of the tuition hike. Next up, okay, so I wanted to also mention that Premier Furey made a commitment 1 year ago to reconsider the tuition funding, and we haven't seen anything from this commitment besides funding to eliminate the campus renewal fee, which is not enough. On that note, I wanted to ask a question to Minister Howell. Students have met with you multiple times, and we have been vocal that student assistance in the form of loans are not a replacement for reducing tuition. In most cases, international students cannot access these forms of funding, and yet you painted it as equitable earlier tonight. How is a system that excludes international students equitable? And I also want to ask, do you commit to making sure 100% that international students have full access to student assistance? Thank you.
Thank you, and again, this is an issue that came up in our conversation when we met in the past. So, sitting here in this seat, and my colleagues to my right would agree, and if they don't, then they're lying. But when you look at your primary accountability, it is to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So that's not to say that our international students are an afterthought, but it's certainly to say that our primary investment is in our students in Newfoundland and Labrador. So with that said, we have made the offer to the representatives of the international student body here at Memorial University to come to our office to have a chat, to see what might be a reasonable way that we can support international students here in our province and in the Memorial University community. And I know that the university itself does offer significant supports and some investments into our international students, so I'll defer to Dr. Bose for some examples of that and how they continue to support the international students here in Newfoundland and Labrador. But I will reference that our international student fees are still some of the lowest in the country. So when you're looking at our undergrad, they're still some of the lowest. I didn't say they were the lowest, but when you look at some of the other universities, we do fall within some of the lower end of those in terms of our undergrad and our graduate students, which are at different levels, but they're still very low in terms of the countrywide fees. So again, as I said, I don't have an answer yet to how we can work on supporting our international students, but I have welcomed the representatives from the student union to come in and have that conversation with us.
So yeah, that's the Atlantic Canada is the comparison when it's favorable, but when it comes to international student tuition, MUN undergraduate student tuition for international students is the highest in Atlantic Canada. And yes, thank you for clarifying. I think the missing piece was first year enrollment is what I was trying to say, not overall enrollment, Mr. Bose. Okay, let's get Mr. Pardy's reaction.
Anytime we make informed decisions, we need to look at data. And I think data often speaks clearly, and that's what probably should drive our policy and our regulations in lots of cases. I know in MUN I had heard, and again I don't have the figure, that food bank usage was increasing. So if we're looking at that as being another data point that we've got, looking at who is utilizing or accessing it, if it is primarily our international students, if it's our local students, then that is good data points that we would need to have. We would always have comparisons in negotiations. I know with teachers we always had negotiations with the Atlantic provinces, or the maritime provinces. us being a member of the Atlantic Provinces. The only thing being is that often formed the baseline of what when we entered negotiations, and that was a fair comparison. If in fact we are, as undergraduates, the most expensive in the Atlantic Provinces, then that aborts or does away with the benchmark and what we look at as our anchor points. So I don't have data in front of me. President Bose, I'm sure, would have the data to see as to where we are with that. But I would think data will inform us. I don't know. The minister has stated that the international fees were somewhat, I guess, amongst the lowest in Canada, and the data would inform that. If it isn't, then that's something that ought to be looked into. But anyway, I would need to see the data on that, and I think the data would inform us.
I've talked to a few graduates, people, whether they're international students or students who come from other parts of the country, and it's interesting, they came probably because the tuition was affordable and stayed. So you think about the human capital, for lack of a better term, that contribute to the province. It becomes more unaffordable, then that human capital, the people we need for that innovative future, are not going to stay here. And I still look at it as our people, as our largest resource, and the need to invest most in. I've been in food banks where we've helped students who were international students who are just struggling to put food on the table, who might be restricted or the ability to get work. We met here at the university, I think last year, and the professor's name escapes me, about the lack of housing, of affordable housing. We've had, people been told, well, maybe you need to defer your education if you can't get that affordable housing. But it's sending a message in many ways that the people we need really need to go somewhere else. So I look at it from a business perspective. When we hear how we incentivize companies to set up shop in this province. There are incentives, tax incentives, and tax, but you name it, whatever there to bring business here, to set up shop here. Well, shouldn't we also be looking upon our human resources in the same way of incentivizing people to come here? And I think then to stay here, and then to set up businesses, to become employers, to become workers, to contribute to the economy. I think on that principle, that's where I would start from on this question.
Mr. Bose.
Nick, you asked about the 19.1% again, and I think we've beaten it to death, but the best thing there is I think our offices can send MUNSU some information afterwards. Definitely there's a
we'll follow up with you too.
What's that?
I said we'll follow up with you too.
Thank you. The international students and, well, first of all, the families of international students are not taxpayers here, and I think the Minister alluded to that in terms of how those students should be subsidised from the taxpayers of Newfoundland and Labrador. But so the rates are different, and that's usual in most universities across the certainly Canada, Australia, UK, and so on. But I do have some of those numbers here with me. We are not the most expensive in Atlantic Canada. We're not the lowest either. We're somewhere in the mid-range. Dalhousie is much higher than us, and then there are a couple of universities higher than us, St Mary's and Arcadia. Not much higher, but similar. When you look at the national scene, we're about mid-range. with some universities surprisingly higher, like Toronto Metropolitan University, another $10,000, $11,000 higher than Memorial for international students. It's in a worldwide sense, the international fees at Memorial are very reasonable. When you look at the universities that international students would prefer to go to across the world, and from many countries, especially across Southeast Asia, and I have direct experience of this from being in Australia, putting up the fees actually adds to the value of the universities. And I'm not suggesting that's a good thing to do here, but across Australia that certainly can have an impact. Charging too low for certain students coming in from certain countries, the price is an indication of quality. So one has to be very careful with pricing in the international market.
I just verified, you're right, Dalhousie is about $400 more. So it's not, you're right.
31,900.
They
all have a range, so...
okay. I was just looking at what it said here. All right, Mr. Burns, you have a take on this?
Not a thing. President Bose is well able to respond to that.
All right. Let's go to the next question.
Hello. My question is a follow-up to Mr. Howell's answer to Nicholas's question. You said that government of this province, your main commitment is to find librarians first, and I think that's quite disturbing, especially when international students, like you've claimed, we bring so much resource and talent to this province. You have an aging population, so we're kind of part of the future of this province. So I think it's very disturbing that you said that, especially, and a slap on the face to every international student in this room who pays ×2, ×4 of what domestic students are paying. And I think it's also a little bit naive that we sit down here every time. I joined MUN in 2019, and anytime we speak to you folks, government officials, you say, oh, we're one of the lowest in the country. We were the lowest, and now we're no longer the lowest. Is it also become like #1, highest in the province, or sorry, in the country, and people cannot no longer attend university in this province that we sit down?
I think your comment was in relation to the previous question, and I in no means at all meant to be disrespectful to the contribution that the international students or the international community bring to Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's been one of the flagships of this government is to work on our immigration targets and bring new people into our province, recognizing full well that we face demographic challenges and that we simply cannot sustain life here in Newfoundland and Labrador without that investment in that population growth. So I certainly don't mean to be disrespectful, but my point was that when we look at some of the funding opportunities, they are primarily directed towards Newfoundland and Labrador students. But then some of the other opportunities that are available to international students are, you do get your MCP coverage. You do get to access the things here in Newfoundland and Labrador that are already funded by the provincial government. So it's not as simple as a put and a take to see, what the charge would be for service rendered in terms of how we look at our international students. So we want to continue to work with the international student community, and as I said, there was an open invitation to come to my office. I think it was you that I actually made it to. You were the representative that was sitting at the table. So certainly an open invitation to come and talk about what supports we may be able to provide to our international students and how we can look at doing things better.
Mr. Pardy.
That's a good point, or question that you would raise. If we look at our Newfoundland and Labradorians students first as prioritized. But I know that many of us look at the international students that we would have in our campus as being investments and ones that would hopefully remain and stay with us in our province in order to make us grow and help us out with our economy. I'm not sure what percentage does stay, and I'm probably back to the data point again as to what percentage of international students remain in our economy. If that number is increasing and significant, then there's a case that we need to look closely or more closely at what the fees we have. What I had stated earlier that our party was looking at doing was the fact that if anybody is staying to be productive members of our economy and society, there would be a tax rebate back in order to pay back what the investment was within their education. And I guess the genesis of that is that if somebody gets their education here within the MUN and just leaves and goes to some other jurisdiction, that is a little different than somebody getting their education here, remaining in Newfoundland and Labrador in order to grow our economy and to be. So I always refer back to the data to see where we are. I know that President Bose mentioned about there are some institutions in Atlantic Canada that there are higher fees that would be. So again, I defer without the absence of data. It's a job to formalize an opinion on it. But with data, I think we're better able to make a determination and create an action on that.
I think certainly I will say about Minister Howell, certainly not an attempt to in any way, shape, or form somehow draw that distinction. But I will, be between Newfoundlander and Newfoundland Labrador students and international students. But I do think at times we've got to be careful, because I see sometimes in housing, you see the competition and you see the people will say, well, we've got to look after our own. And I think we've always got to be careful about that kind of language. We really do.
Do you want to put the mic towards your mouth?
Sorry about that. I can hear myself perfectly. Obviously you can. So I think we've got to be careful of it. And I know that's not what Minister Howell was saying, but in many ways, once you set to pull up roots from another country, another province, and to come here where you may not have family is a significant, I think, act of courage in many ways. So it's about making sure that the stresses that come with that are not added to by it financially. I think in many ways when we hear that, and Dr. Bose talked about charging too low and how that in terms of tuition can send the wrong message. Well, sometimes the most expensive is not always the best. But why not look at it from this way? I'm assuming regardless of whether it's the price, let's take a look at academic merit. I'm assuming that you get into a university, a post-secondary institution, it should be based on your academic merit, your ability there, and not necessarily your ability to pay. That would be an injustice. So in many ways, if it's affordable, and there are countries where tuition is free, but it's based on your academic, you've earned the right to get here because of your academic qualifications. That should be the thing that when we're looking to attracting a new innovation and people to this province. To me, international students, along with other students, are facing challenges in housing, in inflation. So let's make Newfoundland, I guess, to incentivize people to come here and hopefully stay here and make Newfoundland and Labrador their home. Thank you.
Dr. Bose and afterwards, Glenn, thanks.
Thank you. Memorial has about 27% international students now, and that brings a tremendous diversity to the university. I think it's 127 countries at the moment are represented by the international student body. Many of our faculty and other staff are international too, and I myself come from at least 2 countries in the past in my ancestry. I personally have worked with international students throughout my career, and my research team is made up of international students 100%. They are a very talented group that come here. They come here and stay often. They start businesses, and as I said earlier, they are a main driver, or very much an important driver of the innovation ecosystem in the province. Starting businesses, creating employment, adding to the as an economic driver of the province. So yes, they are students who should be supported. They are an important part of the future of Newfoundland and Labrador.
My daughter's boyfriend hails from Belize. He's an undergraduate in engineering. He works at Newfoundland Hydro, and he intends to stay here. And my wife and I are delighted that he's going to, as is my daughter, of course. My son's father-in-law is from Libya, has been here many years, and we run a business for many years. They'll do very, very successfully. My church just down the street, we have international people attending, always have. Fortunate enough because of the proximity to this university, I think, largely. I think that's what drives this place, what enriches this place, and to do otherwise is really looking inward, backward, on a mentality, whatever you want to describe it as. I would hope that this place, like most places, continue on the path of being global citizens, opening up to the globe, welcoming the globe, because that is certainly how we have already succeeded. We will succeed even more. That's
All right, so I'm just going to change the time just because we don't have that much time left. We're going to do 1-minute answers now. So let's keep the questions going.
Right before we got to my question, John. All right, very quickly, for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Aiden Parsons. For the past 3 years, I've been involved with post-secondary education at the Marine Institute, Penn, Memorial, and provincial levels. In those years, like all of us, I have seen the cost of living crisis explode. Students now not only deal with skyrocketing tuition and cuts to education, but also a rise in rent, food, and household utilities. Food insecurity particularly is one which is near to my heart. I know fellow students who have come to a place where they could no longer afford meat. The campus food bank ran out of food not 2 years ago, and I am proud to lead a student union which raised nearly $400 for the campus food bank through selling off the luxury of pawing Marine and student instructors and administration in the face. I would like to bring that up. So my question is, how does the continuously deteriorating cost of living situation figure into government and university assumptions of student need?
Good question. Thank you very much for that. And I think we all recognize that there are significant implications for the cost of living. And I got a very detailed answer that I could give you, but I'm already getting the signal up here. But it is for, in terms of our student assistance and our grants and loans, there is a mechanism built in there that accounts for cost of living. So it gives consideration to what the averages are and the rates that have gone up or what have gone down. That'll be a continued mechanism. As referenced earlier, we had meetings with the Premier who wanted to implement other mechanisms or some other types of programming or tuition relief that we could use given the inflationary pressures and the cost of living right now. So that's another ongoing conversation. And overall, as a government, there is a continued effort to apply any type of relief for the cost of living in terms of your light bill, your gas bill, and all of those things included. 5 seconds to spare.
Looking forward to the new announcement for the future. Thank you. Greg?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we are certainly in a cost of living crisis, and the students at MUN are caught up in that crisis. I'm not sure what we've come down with in the budget to assist you. You know, we may have dropped if you don't have a vehicle, you know, the tax on gas has been reduced. There's been a lot of benefits that's been put out there, but not many for students. I look at the sign here, we need space on our campus for a thrift store. So we've got a lot of signs that indicators that action should be taken. There ought to be some measures or something taken in order to help with the cost of living that would be at MUN. I'm not sure if the removal of millions of dollars would be each year, because that's only compounding the implication that you would have as a student. But we surely need measures in order to reduce the stress and the situation you find yourself.
For a good 35 years, I volunteered at a food bank, and I'm looking at the amendment to some of the students beforehand about the use of finding a space for a thrift store. Well, that's a practical way, but I will say this: it shouldn't be a charity model. Okay, even though I volunteer with the charity, it shouldn't be a charity model. And I will go, let's look at the cost of living, because there are students who live on campus and students who live off, and then there are students who have to find their own rent. One of the things I'll be very clear about, one of the things we pushed even, has to do with making rent and housing affordable. Whether that's more non-market, community-based housing, about bringing in some form of rent and vacancy control, so that rents are not going up, and as a student on a very limited income, you should be able to afford a place to live at the very least. And I did it in 4 seconds left.
I agree that there's tremendous pressure on students and pretty low safety nets. So we have actually increased the funding going to the various student relief funds. About 60,000 was increased last year and was provided through the Provost Office to the School of Grad Studies and the Dean of Students to build those funds. And we've added some recently also at the Grenfell campus into their student emergency funds. And that funding is provided in grocery gift cards and also in larger amounts of $250 increments. It's the first time I've seen that request for a thrift store. Please send an application in to us. And I agree, housing is an issue and expensive.
Mr. Berners.
Even though there's been money put into emergency funds, don't get us wrong, we're not saying we put some money in, go away, we've done our thing. It's never enough. It always needs to be more. We have to keep looking under every rock, because these, of course, are the most fundamental human needs. And surely we can sort of chip away and find as best we can to serve those. I see the note about thrift store. Short of the goodness, with 6 million square feet, we can find a spot for a thrift store. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I really am grateful that you're saying that you'll support being able to find and secure an on-campus spot for the thrift store. I just want to say and ask the question to everyone. Can you please raise your hand if you have a pillow on your bed, if you sleep with a pillow? Thank you. If you were able to eat today? Thank you. If you have a professional outfit in your wardrobe? Thank you. There are so many students on campus who are sleeping without a pillow, without blankets. I've seen it firsthand myself in the residence. When students move in During the fall semester, they can't afford extra. They can't afford to buy professional outfits for interviews. They can't afford any miscellaneous items, feminine hygiene products, all of the above. And it puts them at a disadvantage. This should be an equitable learning environment, but unfortunately, we see many students doing without, and every year this cycle of poverty continues. I'm sure many of you have noticed that at the end of the year when students move out, those who are able to have a lot of items may not be able to take it home with them. So a lot of gently used items get thrown in the garbage. Thousands of items go to landfill. Year after year, the garbages fill up. For the past 2 years, our group has done yard sales and pop-up thrift stores, and we tried to start a movement here on campus to rehome items that would otherwise have been thrown into the landfills. Since that time, we've supported the needs of the students and the community through various donations to local community groups. This weekend at the latest pop-up yard sale in MUN residence, we raised over $2,000 and donated all of the funds, every single dollar raised, to the MUN Campus Food Bank who really need it the most. Thank you. For us to make a lasting impact and continue our efforts to rehome gently used items, our group, our student thrift store, also needs a place to call home. So how can this university support us in finding a suitable place on campus for our permanent thrift store?
I'll give this one to President Bose.
Please send your request in to my office and we will follow up as the board chair indicated.
We have sent emails to your office.
I have not seen a request for the thrift store space until now.
Well, then I'm going to ask for your personal email after this.
Yeah. I'm happy to do that. But you can send it to president@mun.ca and put attention based on this conversation. I'll get it.
Awesome. We do one more question, and then that's okay. That's 2 more questions. Okay.
Great. I can do more than count. So, hi folks. My name is Mackenzie Broaders. I'm the executive director of advocacy with MUNSU. This is going to be pretty quick. It's not really so much a question as just something that I wanted to bring up to the folks who are on stage here today. So in my role as the Director of Advocacy, I primarily assist students. That can be with academic issues, but it's also largely with non-academic issues. And I want everyone on stage today to know that a very significant portion, I would say over a quarter of all of the requests that my office this year have been from international students having issues with housing. I would say well over a quarter have been international students in general, and I really want to be clear that international students are not well supported at this university or in this province. There needs to be better supports in place. I have seen international students living in U-Hauls. I have seen 13 international students evicted from one home. It is absolutely unacceptable the way that international students are treated. They are coming here to study. They are paying way more than I pay as a domestic student, and I've never had to worry about any of those things. So I really want everyone out there to know, I did have a question, but I know we're out of time. But I really want to make clear, MUNSU works every single day with international students who are facing issues here, be that housing, be that legal issues, be that issues with food, be that issues with academics. The supports are not in place in the province, and they're not in place in the university. So both sides of the stage today need to work to address those issues. Thank you.
Well said. Let's give one last question to Matt. Matt Barter. We did say we would end soon, but so let's hear it from Matt.
Thank you, John, for introducing me. So first of all, I'd like to thank Jim Dinn for bringing up the example of the student paying for the library at MUN with the student
center fee, but what he left out is the university made a commitment to the students that at a later time that the university would fund a student center. Years later, we still don't have that student center, even though across Canada, the student union buildings, that the student union won the entire building, it's theirs. But at MUN, we don't have that. And so that's a vote in promise to the university. It's the same thing with the Woods fee. There was a handshake between the president at the time and the student union that would be a temporary fee that would be eliminated, yet we still have that fee. So the entire relationship between the administration and the student is the administration have always been really bad to students at Memorial. And particularly in the recent years, the administration have cracked down on student protests. We've seen this with myself when I protested former President Diane Timmons with a stop sign that said that she needed to be stopped and no to tuition hike and no to control pending. I was banned from campus for over 3 months, and then I was hit with a non-academic probation sentence. And I took MUN to the Supreme Court for this, which still not has just been decided on after over a year. And also, I have another matter at the Supreme Court involving access to information, because I filed an access request for the bonuses given to the executives at the Genesis Center and Seashore, and Memorial University and Bose said that Memorial does not have that information, but the Information and Privacy Commissioner wrote a report that in 16 pages that says that MUN does have that information, and that information should be released to the public. So Memorial and Bose lied about that, and not only did they lie, they are now taking it to the Supreme Court to prevent that information from being released to the public, and they are spending tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees to prevent that information from being shared with the public. So to quote former Mayor Dennis O'Keefe, who said on the radio, who is trying to hide what? So my question, to make it broad for everyone to answer, where do you stand on protest rights, civil liberties, and freedom of expression, and where do you stand on transparency and access to information? Thank you.
So this one will start with Bose, and yeah, let's give it to a minute.
To be honest, I couldn't understand all of what you said, but I will say that as far as I know...
I'll clarify. It's the Student Union Building, the campus band, and the C-Core Genesis Center ATIP that's been blocked. What's going on, and are you hiding the C-Core and Genesis ATIP from getting the information that he's been requesting? And where do you stand on civil liberties and the court case against Matt Pardy?
We will follow up in the usual way through the processes but I haven't lied as far as I know.
You said you don't have the information.
All right, yeah. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. We don't have much time. Let's. Anybody else on civil liberties? C-Core and Genesis Center.
I'll just take a quick minute to respond.
Yes.
This is certainly a conversation that we could probably have for an hour, I'm sure, especially considering how passionate you are about this. But I think given the climate that we find ourselves in right now, it's important to recognize that everybody does have a right to peaceful protest and demonstration. However, it shouldn't be at the consequence of another individual's rights or causes, and certainly not to condone any types of violence or discrimination. So I believe that certainly the stance that we can take. And as for some of the other questions, hopefully we'll get the chance to talk in the future.
I think if the Information and Privacy Commissioner stated that the information should be released, it should be released. And that's where the transparency comes in. If these fine individuals over here, and by the way, I commend you for your advocacy on the thrift store. I think that would be a valuable, great addition for the university. If you were holding placards that may have been a little bit disparaging to me, with not in the extreme sense, I wouldn't think that that would be acceptable. You know, and I'm sure Minister Howell can state some examples that would be unacceptable. So again, it depends on what the situation would be, but to hold a placard with a statement that would be on that, I don't see that as being, you know, would not be permitted.
It was a student protest that, over the death of a student on Princeville Parkway that led to the overpasses. There for that. So protest works. Protest is a fundamental right of democracy. Also, you can have disagreement without being polarized, and you can find that discussion as well. But the other part, transparency, I can tell you that in the House of Assembly, on a variety of issues, we fought for transparency, as have our colleagues in the opposition on a number of issues. That is key. Craig talked about having the data earlier. Well, that's in large part having the facts, having the information is key, and transparency is key to get it. Thank you.
All right, that's about does it for the town hall. I want to thank everybody for coming. That was a long 2 hours and 15 minutes, but we got through it. We got some answers, we got some non-answers, and let's have a drink. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending and being so patient. Cheers.